Hello, everyone. We have reached the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to the Choosing a Location Vendor webinar today. You should be able to see the first slide already on your monitor. I will handle any technical issues that come up and the official start and end of our seminar today. Before we start, I would like to share some information with you. On one side of your screen, you'll see the control panel or a red arrow, which you just click open the control panel. Now, you would want that control panel open if you need to make a change to your audio mode or if you have a question during the seminar. Otherwise, it's a good idea to have that control panel minimized so you can see the presenter's screen. Everyone will be muted, which really cuts down on the amount of background noise that we sometimes get. Questions are very welcome during the seminar. During this webinar, you can ask questions, and there is a chat box in your control panel that is outlined in blue. That is where you would write a question if you have one. We will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. I will be sending out the presentation slides and handouts later today. So if you have those for your reference and for the best audio and video quality, please remove any other programs that you may be using, such as handheld devices, smartphones, which can interfere with our audio quality. Now, you should be able to see our screen on your monitor. Today, again, we will be talking about how to choose a localization vendor, which is a lot like dating. You have to really evaluate what you want from a long-term relationship with each vendor that you have encountered. We have a unique perspective on what the localization vendor needs from you, and also what you, as a client, need in order to get organized and before you can even get to the point of asking for an RFP, which, for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, an RFP is a request for proposal. I'd also like to get to know you a little bit so I can have an idea about what you need and what you are looking for in terms of information. So if you could use the chat window to identify what volume of content you translate every year, the number of words or number of documents, how many languages do you translate into, and what are your biggest challenges with your current vendor? So if you could use the chat window, that would be great. And later, we will review the poll results. Today, before we actually talk about the RFP, it's important that you fully understand what's going on in the industry. What information you need to collect, and the selection criteria. And then we'll talk about the RFP itself, how to evaluate the proposals, and also what you need to do once you have accepted someone's proposal. As I mentioned, we will respond to your questions at the end of the webinar. Most of the localization industry is composed of medium or small-sized companies that provide services either in particular industries such as medical, financial, and so on. Smaller language service providers provide translations in one language. So the best thing to do is to look at the medium or small size vendors who can scale with you. You will want to get, if you want to get better customer service, more personalized workflow, you'll have a more personal relationship with them. These language service providers typically have their own translators who've been working for them in a particular industry. They usually work with other larger, getting away from me there. Let's go back. There we go. I don't know what's going on with these slides. All right. So these language service providers typically have their original translators who've been working for them in a particular industry, and they usually work with other larger, medium, and enterprise level service providers, and typically very, very small, and they probably can give you what you need if you have any volume at all. In addition to this, they can assist you if you need marketing materials to translate for foreign market penetration. Typically, they have the project management process in place already to support a large project or super large projects. They use senior translators for internal quality assurance. The dirty little secret in the localization industry is that all the language companies contract with individual translators to do the work. This is a really key thing for you to understand, because when you're looking at translation, there is a limited pool of translators who are capable of providing the language combination in the industry with the experience that you need. So if you go with one language service provider one time and another LSP another time, you might be working with the same translator under the hood, but the project management process, the customer service, all of those things are going to be different because it's a different company. So there is a limited pool of qualified translators in the industry. And for a particular language, this is especially true if you were in a highly specialized industry or you need a rare language. What this means for you as a customer is that when you are looking at vendors, you need to focus on their processes, their customer service, their translator requirements, the treatment of their contractors, their industry specialization. These are the important factors when you select a vendor. It's a small industry, so and you're going to start hearing which vendor does the best job. I am just looking at how I can mute everybody here. Okay, so again, it's a small industry, and you're going to start hearing which vendor does the best job in taking care of their translators and which one has a good process and all of that kind of information. Great. There we go. So most language service providers have requirements for the translators they use, and they often certify these translators as well. So fluency is the most obvious one, right? There are different levels of fluency. Basic fluency means you know 2,000 words, but that's about all you need in order to talk to a 2-year-old. Native speakers average 30 to 40,000 words in their native language. Fluent second language speakers average about 20,000 words in their second language. So translators typically have close to average native fluency in their second language, particularly in their specialty. Good translators are also typically excellent writers and editors in their native language. Sometimes they have issues in their second language with idioms and cultural nuances, unless they were raised in that culture. Now, the difference between the native speaker and the really excellent second language speaker is the cultural undertone, the unspoken, the almost unconscious thing that only somebody who grew up in a culture would recognize. And even then, it might not be a conscious recognition. These nuances are critical to accurate translation, especially in literary translation and interpretation. If you have a meeting, you would want an interpreter who is really a native speaker, not only in the language, but also in the local variant of the language of the audience. You will want translators living in country at least part of the time. And the reason for this is culture is a fluent thing. And so as a consequence, languages as well. Preferred terminology and colloquial meanings change over time. And unless someone is regularly immersed in that culture, they are going to miss some language elements. Background is another characteristic. Just like You wouldn't hire a technical communicator in marketing. You would not hire a person who knows nothing about your industry or technology. Localization companies don't want to hire translators not familiar with your industry terminology in both their native language and source language. Translators often start out in another field, such as engineering or medical, and then they decide that they just like the language side of things, and they get certified as translators. So a lot of them have a really strong technical background in the particular field. So having that background will give you better translation as well. And then certification indicates the level of competency of a translator. And there are several organizations that certify translators. In addition, language service providers also test their translators before get back there, before they test their translators before they come on board and certify them within the company to ensure quality assurance. This is a question to ask them. What are your ways of determining the quality of an individual translator you'll be contracting with? Having settled this, even the best translator has to work with the materials that he or she is given. If the source content is poor and difficult to understand, chances are good the translation will be poor as well. All right, let's move on to the basic process of localization. The documentation team, marketing team, puts together materials for the localization manager who gets the translated content back. You need to understand what the process is and the key differences in the way that content is processed on the localization side versus on the content development side. So in the localization process, one of the key differences is clear parameters. First, you start with a piece of content that's been developed with one language. You start with a template that your staff already put together. In content development, the tech writer is often creating the template and collecting the glossary, terms, if they're doing terminology management at all. While doing the research and creating that content, there will be alterations. So it's kind of a more fuzzy process. The tech writer is ideally writing the way the product or service is supposed to work. And a lot of times during the design process, they make changes that then affect localization as well. Translation and localization involves doing transference rather than development, because you already start with the existing piece of content and you are transferring that information into another language and making it acceptable for a particular locale. So this is the difference between clear parameters and fuzzy parameters. The other thing that in the localization process, is each one of these steps is performed by a different person. Typically, whereas in content development, the whole process might be performed by one or two people, because there's a separation in the process, you can get a lot of different results. If the process is run very well, or if the project management is not very good at your localization vendor level, you can get a lot of failures in the feedback between the translation, between the desktop publishing, the QA, and so on. But where in the content development process, because one person or maybe two people are involved from the start to finish, you get less of that. The other thing that happens is the content development typically involves a technical communication team. And so that team is participating in the product development from the very beginning. Whereas the localization team is often at a last minute step. It gets pushed into the product cycle last, and even the development deadline and milestones can worsen the situation, because you're constantly expecting the localization team to be sleeping in their office and working 24/7 to get something out the door. You can't get that quality that you are looking for. So you can see the biggest savings by making sure your source content and processes are in the best shape they can be before they hit localization. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that localization takes about 80% of the development time. So if it takes 1,000 hours to do content development, it can take 800 hours to do the localization, which means you can't just push the localization to the last week. You're doing simultaneous shifts in multiple languages, which is what most companies strive for. You are really putting your product release schedule at risk. It's better if you're not pushing content to localization to the last minute and you are involving them early in the process. Now, another common problem can be the in-country review. You, as the client, are responsible for the control and review in this process. Your vendor can help you integrate your feedback in the QA process, but you basically own the resources doing the country review. And those are typically your employees. They know the product and they have the language skills to evaluate the technical accuracy of the translation. So if you have, and most companies do have, an in-country review process, you can really be bogged down. You can really be bogging down your localization process as a whole. And if they're making a lot of preference changes, you're increasing your cost and possibly diminishing your content quality in these target languages. So these are the significant areas where you can save money. With any process, making changes later in the game will cost you more and it will jeopardize your schedule. So you really need to look at how you're organizing your content before sending it to localization. Here is an integrated technical communication process. If you're contemplating hiring a language service provider before you get to the RFP phase, really take a close look at your content development process and actively seek ways to bring in your localization vendor early and integrate them with your process and workflow so you don't run with your hair on fire right before the product release. Terminology management is very important. It's a very important component in this process. Terminology management, at a minimum, includes people from the documentation team, the development team, marketing, regulatory, and possibly QA or legal, depending on what your particular corporate circumstances are. So the terminology management is a huge thing in most companies. Also, having a style guide, having templates better optimized for internalization, that can accommodate right to left as well as left to right writing if you are translating into Hebrew or Arabic. If not, then you might need to think about how you are going to do that. And in some cases, the tools that you're using might not even support some of the languages that you're translating into. Process improvements in the QA, editing, and changing management processes will help immensely with the localization cost and localization quality. So partnering with localization vendors, working on your processes, and identifying where the issues are will help you. Now, here's a list of information items you need to collect from vendors before you send out an RFP. Oh, get back here. So the first one is content or product development process diagram. You need a list of languages and locales that you need. You need to know what your volume is, what's the number of words. And then a list of tools used, the tools used to develop and manage the content. You also need an understanding of any constraints or limitations and a detailed project schedule, the scope, the current status. Additionally, you need here. Oh, key contacts within your company, glossary, style guides, templates, TMs, which are translation memory, sample source content, knowledge of your budget, how you're allotting your budget, and performance metrics, as well as a list of any additional requirements. Okay, so your selection criteria is kind of like putting together a salad. You pick and choose what you want in that salad. Some of the things might include customer service, quality of a sample translation, the responsiveness, the completeness of the proposal, the cost, that you want to make sure that the solutions match your needs, and an understanding of the processes, as well as assumptions and risk assessment. And of course, you want to make sure it's a good fit, that the team is a good fit. All right, here's an example of an evaluation. So you would use the same evaluation spreadsheet for everyone in your team to evaluate vendors. This will help you organize your thoughts and streamline the responses from everyone. You want to get a team to work on the RFP. And it's a good idea to put on your team, your selection team, put on a development person, a budget person, a terminology person, a project management person, a documentation manager, a localization manager, and a marketing manager. Okay, so now let's talk about the RFP. The RFP, the request for proposal, needs to have a structure. So it shouldn't be more than 5 to 10 pages long. And it should also include a non-disclosure agreement, which is also sometimes referred to as an NDA. Here are we'll go over these in a little bit more depth on the next slides. But the pieces of an RFP include an introduction, a process graphic, the scope, the schedule, the tools, and the preferred format and due date, as well as any other contract information. And of course, supplemental files. There are always supplemental files. All right, so the RFP introduction should be not more than a page to explain what the business is about. It's the who, what, where, when, how, and why. The business context you're talking about, who the audience and the customers are, and some on the project background. The second piece is the process graphic. This is where you want to give the product development lifecycle, content, some content development graphic, and some explanatory text. Again, you want to give as much context as you can. And again, also, about 1 or 2 paragraphs are enough. So you outline the expectations from the vendor, and then this will help the vendor understand your needs. When you're talking about the scope of the project, you want to be as specific as possible. The more details you give the vendors, the better they can understand your requirements. So you want to include the volume, the source content types, the complexity of the project, the languages and the locales, and the output format. Then you move on to the schedule. You want to identify when you can start sending your localization materials. You create a project schedule. You highlight the localization dependencies and release a schedule. It's a good idea to schedule regular meetings and to state that you'll do a small project first so you can back out if you're not happy with that first project. Okay. Now you want to talk about the tools that you're going to use. And then the vendors can determine what resources they will need on their localization side. So some of the tools include the type and use templates. And that's where you identify the tools that you've been using to create the content, including graphics and the software. Again, that's going to help the vendor determine what resources they need so they can give you an accurate proposal. All right, so then you want to talk about your preferred format and the due date. How you want the proposal delivered to you. Do you want a hard copy? Do you want a PDF? Do you want it in a spreadsheet, on a form, etc.? How do you want it? And you want to give them at least 1 to 2 weeks to return it to you, depending on the complexity of the project. Now, those supplemental files, you want to provide actual source files and zip them together and include company name and date in the file name. So it makes it easy for the vendor to find. And then, all right. And then you also want to make sure that you provide 2 names for each department in your company in case one person is out of town or sick, so that the vendor, if they need to reach someone in case of a question or a problem, they have the ability to do that. Okay, so in terms of vendor research, you want to publish your RFP on your website or any other platform, or you can do a pre-selection. You can select some vendors and send the RFP specifically to those people. Here's some requirements for selecting a vendor, or that can help you in selecting a vendor. You want to ask, can they handle the volume and the complexity? Do they specialize in your industry? Can they manage all the languages that you need currently and those you anticipate or plan to add within the next 5 years? Do they have a good reputation among translators? For example, do they pay on time? Do they treat their translators well? Etc. One of the things that you can do is you can tweet the name. Oh, you want to know if they provide good customer service and are they a stable company? So one of the things you can do is you can tweet the name of the company to see or do a online search to see reviews about them. You can also check them out on the American Translators Association, the Globalization and Localization Association, and you can ask for recommendations. Okay, now when it comes time to evaluate the proposals, this kind of checklist helps you organize the evaluation criteria. And if you have each member of your team do the evaluation on their own using this criteria, and then you can get together and go over the different rankings. When it comes time to formalize the relationship, you want to make sure that you're checking references, you're signing contracts and NDAs. You hold a kickoff meeting, set up a pilot project, identify tasks that can be done outside the project level, and evaluate processes and tweak them if necessary. Finally, you want to review the contract and the processes to avoid any last-minute surprises. All right, let's take a few moments and debunk some myths about translation services. The first myth is that translation services are way too expensive for your business. The truth is, translation is not an expensive proposition anymore. We offer bulk packages, use sophisticated software, and offer term contracts with clients, all in a bid to help our clients save time and cut costs. The second myth of translation services is that translation is as easy as pie. No, 100 times no. Translators are scholars. Translation is a time-intensive work that requires multiple skills, including an eye for accuracy, attention to details, knack for research, flair for language, and comprehensive knowledge about a discipline area or a business, a discipline area of business or an industry. The third myth is that all translation agencies are one and the same. Says who? Professional translation agencies are a cut above the rest. From specialized language experts to expert native translators, from multilingual web design and localization to global digital marketing solutions. Top-notch translators, translation agencies, offer best-in-class services to cover all your needs. The fourth translation services myth is that machine translation can do it. You have spent time and money producing marketing materials, and you are going to trust machine translation to handle your baby? Think twice. Computers are just not ready yet to translate on their own, let alone replicate or better human translation. There is a long way to go for computers to match expert translators in understanding of subtle nuances and contextual intuition. So, until then, your business will be at an advantage sticking with expert human translators. Number 5, my business is not going global, so translation services are not going to be useful. Maybe you're running a mom and pop business now, and you don't require translation services. Maybe the idea of taking a business that has been very successful domestically and trying to duplicate that service internationally is daunting. Get ahead of the ball game and don't wait for your competitors to take the lead. Learn about what it takes to go global and partner with a language service provider to launch your business in the global market. Before we get into questions, let me summarize. A look into the localization industry is opportune as localization becomes an essential tool for developing increased revenues for businesses worldwide. In this webinar, we sort through the current state of affairs, we looked at a few assumptions and provided methods for selecting a localization company for your future projects. The information was drawn from analysis by the Localization Institute in association with firsthand knowledge of the subject. One fact is plain and simple. There are a large amount of localization providers contracting with a limited amount of qualified translators. That pool of translators gets smaller when dealing with more uncommon languages. If the industry were displayed as a pyramid, the individual translators would form the base below the single language LSP. Above them are the most common providers, the multi-language LSPs. And above them are the large multi-language LSPs. The latter group focuses almost solely on Fortune 100 companies and is probably out of reach for businesses watching this webinar. They lose efficiency when accepting smaller clients. So the medium-sized providers should be your target, especially because they offer more personal relationships. Returning to the limited pool of translators, your business will need to select a company based on its administration, its work ethic, and communication, because the skill of the translators will not differ so much. Before going in depth on how to select the perfect company, the state of the market must be shared. While competition is still very high, considerable consolidation has occurred due to large LSPs taking more and more clients, reaching into Fortune 500 companies and beyond that. Not only this, but other providers purchase tools from the large LSPs, causing smaller LSPs to develop partnerships to reduce dependency on large companies. For instance, SDL. Subcontracting between large and medium providers is also common. The single languages, LSPs, are a consortium of individual translators who focus on individual industries, but they don't have the structure to develop a capable partnership with your firm. Mainstream providers will have certified translators that often receive certification from an association or higher education. They may even have to pass an additional test before contracting with their company. They have to be fluent with good writing and editing skills and understand cultural nuances. Their knowledge of nuances is important if they are native speakers or they have spent time in a particular region recently. Living in a region helps understand how the particular language is slowly evolving as years pass. This is why one of the best measures of quality control is in-country review. But this is often your responsibility as the country and provide feedback on the translation quality. There is significantly less need for in-country and in-demand translators when the source language is English. Translators will cost less since English is the de facto language and more translators are fluent in English. Another aspect, personal background, is important for translators to understand industry-specific terminology. And often specialized translators had careers in a particular field only to realize that they had a penchant for languages. With all of this in mind, a business owner who has already purchased localization may continue directing their business towards the same firms, or they can switch. Just as business owners unfamiliar with the industry will have to find a new vendor. The first step would thus be sending a request for proposal, that RFP. You can either broadcast the RFP, which will likely attract many suitors, and by not revealing everything in the announcement, you can weed out bad companies. Or you can research the vendors yourself. And once a shortlist is compiled, you can Twitter or search online, Gala Global, atanet.org, Multilingual Magazine, and use client side news. And client side news is another good resource to check a vendor's reputation. You want to check their reputation since translators are often equal in competence. Often a long-term relationship is warranted because the partnership could mean more adapted translations and cut costs. However, you may be seeking a one-time purchase, and this will affect your choice. Your selection is also dependent on the number of words, the number of languages, and your industry, as companies may differ in their specialization and language capabilities. Different vendors can be compared using these criteria and a grading scale. Excel has a function to weigh the points accrued by each vendor, but it's important that the entire team, your entire team, has a say in the grading process. If two companies are tied in first place, you can ask them to visit or provide a presentation. Before signing the contract, check to see that the certain requirements are met. They must be able to handle the volume and complexity that you have. They specialize in your industry. They manage the languages you need or plan to add in the future. That they are reputable among translators, meaning they pay on time and they treat them well. That they provide good customer service. and that they're a stable company. Remember, that quality will be just as important as the cost. So you want to go for the best match. All right, so now we have reached the time for questions and answers, and Demetra will go through your comments and answer your questions.
Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome.
I see that we have some answers that came in. So as far as volume goes, the answers provide information that is kind of all over the board. Someone said we have 100,000 pages per year for translation. Somebody else said we use 150 language pairs and around 300 pages per year. Someone else says 7 million words per year. So we have a variety of scenarios here. As far as language go, we see everything from 7 up to 20 languages and a few different challenges that go with each project. So one of the question is, how do we secure good quality and reach lower rates? This is a very good question that is recurring. Well, you need to make sure the vendor has a smooth process with a good, solid quality assurance system that maintains the quality of the translation memories and the tools that he uses to ensure quality for your translations. Another question is how to make sure we test correctly a vendor before actually working with them on a project. I would say start assigning a small project and see how it comes back to you. Then proceed with larger ones if you are satisfied with the results of the small project. Also, make sure you use the tools we have just provided and shoot us an email if you want to take this further or if you have any questions. Now, that's the end of the questions that we received. You can download our guide to translation by clicking on the link in the presentation we'll be sending. That guide includes very important information that will answer some of your questions. And stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be on localizing brand or product names. Thank you very much, and we'll meet you on the next webinar. Bye-bye.